Mary Millington was born Mary Ruth Quilter on November 30th, 1945, in Kensington, London, though she spent much of her childhood in Surrey, England. She grew up in a Britain still recovering from the devastation of the Second World War, a nation marked by austerity, conservatism, and gradual social change. Her childhood was far from easy. Mary's father, a corporal in the RAF, died when she was just a girl. This early loss shaped her sense of vulnerability and longing for affection. Raised primarily by her mother, Mary grew up shy, insecure, and plagued by feelings of inadequacy, particularly about her looks. These insecurities would follow her into adulthood, even as she became one of Britain's most famous glamour figures. Mary left school in her teens with modest qualifications. She initially worked as a dental nurse, a quiet and respectable path. Yet beneath this seemingly ordinary beginning was a restless energy and a yearning for something greater. The conservative society of 1950s and early 1960s England left little room for someone with her ambition, but Mary was determined to carve out her own identity. First steps into modeling and glamour. In the late 1960s, Mary began experimenting with glamour modeling. She posed for small magazines and calendars, gradually gaining confidence in front of the camera. For someone who had always considered herself plain and insecure, the attention was transformative. Modeling gave her a sense of validation and power she had never experienced before. By the early 1970s, Mary's striking looks and playful personality began to draw more attention. She soon became a fixture in men's magazines, appearing in layouts that emphasized her wholesome yet mischievous appeal. Unlike the glossy, distant glamour models of the time, Mary connected with her audience on a more intimate level. She seemed approachable, almost like the girl next door who had chosen to reveal a daring side. It was during this period that she crossed paths with David Sullivan, an ambitious young publisher who would become central to her rise. Sullivan was building a publishing empire around glamour magazines, and he saw in Mary not just a model, but a star. Their partnership propelled her to national fame. Rise to fame in the 1970s. The 1970s were a turbulent decade in Britain. Economic crises, strikes, and political scandals filled the headlines, while cultural life pushed against traditional moral boundaries. In this shifting landscape, Mary Millington emerged as a symbol of sexual liberation and rebellion against old-fashioned conservatism. David Sullivan featured her heavily in his magazines, turning her into one of the most recognizable faces of Britain's adult publishing world. But it was her move into film that truly cemented her fame. In 1977, Mary starred in the comedy Come Play With Me, a film that combined cheeky humor with glamour appeal. Against all expectations, the film became a phenomenon. It ran for over 10 years at London's Moulin Cinema, earning a place in the Guinness Book of Records as one of the longest-running films in British history. Mary's cheeky smile, charismatic screen presence, and growing notoriety made her a household name. Other films, such as The Playbirds, 1978, and Confessions from the David Galaxy Affair, 1979, followed, cementing her as the most famous glamour star in Britain. For a generation of men, she embodied both fantasy and familiarity. Sexy yet down-to-earth, daring yet relatable. The Mary Millington persona. Mary Millington was more than just a performer. She became a cultural symbol. In an era when Britain's obscenity laws still gave police wide powers to censor, seize, and prosecute, Mary stood at the center of debates about morality and freedom. She owned and ran shops that sold glamour magazines and films, many of which were targeted by police raids. Mary saw these raids not just as legal harassment, but as personal persecution. She believed the authorities wanted to make an example of her, and in many ways, they did. Her name appeared in court cases, tabloid exposés, and political arguments about censorship. For her fans, she became a heroine, a woman defying the establishment, laughing in the face of prudishness, and standing up for sexual freedom. But behind the image was a far more vulnerable person. The pressure to live up to her public persona, combined with financial stress and personal insecurities, began to take a toll. Business ventures and independence. Mary was not content to simply be managed. She took control of parts of her career, opening her own shops and investing in business ventures. She wanted independence and financial security, but these ventures only increased her clashes with the law. Her shops were raided repeatedly, stock was seized, and she was fined heavily. Each time, she bounced back, but the cycle drained her emotionally and financially. She began to feel trapped, caught between the image of Mary Millington the star and Mary Quilter, the vulnerable woman. Personal struggles and decline. Behind the glamour, Mary struggled with deep insecurities. Despite her fame, she battled with low self-esteem, depression, and a growing dependency on medication. The pressures of celebrity life weighed heavily on her, and the constant attention from police and tabloids only intensified her anxiety. Financial troubles added further strain. The lifestyle she had built required constant income, but legal battles and fines chipped away at her resources. At the same time, she faced betrayal from people she had trusted, leaving her feeling increasingly isolated. By 1979, Mary was exhausted. Her once glittering career seemed to be slipping away, and the pressures of fame had become unbearable. Tragic death in 1979. On August 19, 1979, Mary Millington was found dead in her car near the A24 in Surrey. She was just 33 years old. The cause was suicide. In her farewell notes, she expressed despair over her declining career, financial struggles, and relentless harassment by authorities. Her death shocked Britain. The tabloids that had once hounded her now turned her into a tragic heroine. Fans mourned the loss of a woman who had seemed so full of life and charm. For many, her death symbolized the cruelty of fame and the heavy price of living as a public figure in a society that both idolized and condemned her. Legacy and cultural impact. Mary Millington's story is one of contradictions. She was at once a fantasy figure and a victim of societal judgment, a symbol of liberation, but also a casualty of the very freedoms she represented. In the decades since her death, Mary has become a cult icon. Documentaries, biographies, and retrospectives have sought to understand the woman behind the smile. Films such as Respectable, The Mary Millington Story, 2016, have reintroduced her to new audiences, framing her not just as a glamour star, but as a tragic figure of 1970s Britain. For many, she represents the darker side of fame, the way society builds up icons only to tear them down. Yet she also endures as a figure of rebellion, a woman who challenged censorship, defied authority, and left an indelible mark on British popular culture. Conclusion. Mary Millington's life was short, but it burned brightly. From a shy girl in Surrey to the most famous glamour star in Britain, she lived a life of contrasts, glamour and despair, independence and persecution, fame and loneliness. Her story continues to fascinate because it reflects universal themes: the search for acceptance, the struggle against authority, and the tragic cost of living under the spotlight. More than 4 decades after her death, Mary Millington remains a legend, a woman who embodied both the liberation and the tragedy of her time.